8%? Just 8%? Chloe Harrington's laughter bounced off the thick glass walls of her corner office. At your age, Paul, we need hungry young talent. We don't need expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. She couldn't finish her sentence without another wave of patronizing laughter shaking her shoulders. I stood there, frozen in that sterile corporate space, clutching my leather portfolio. That folder contained 18 years of my life, documentation of every major project, every system I had architected, every late night I had sacrificed while she was out collecting bonuses large enough to buy vacation homes. I am Paul Jensen. I am 54 years old. I was the director of infrastructure at Apex Cloud Systems, and until that exact moment, I was the kind of guy who foolishly believed that hard work eventually gets recognized. I was the kind of guy who stayed fiercely loyal to one single company for nearly 2 decades, watching 28-year-old junior developers with half my practical experience get promoted right over my head. My wife, Laura, always called me stubborn. My kids, Olivia and Noah, thought I was practically from the Stone Age. But what Chloe completely failed to understand was that my so-called outdated approach was the only thing keeping their cloud infrastructure running flawlessly. While she was getting her expensive degree, I was crawling around in freezing server rooms at 3 a.m. The cloud migration project I designed saved this company $2.3 million annually, I said. The security framework I implemented prevented 3 major breach attempts last year alone. The threat detection algorithms. Chloe waved her hand dismissively, still chuckling as she leaned back in her ergonomic chair. Everyone is replaceable, Paul. Even senior engineers with decades of experience, she said, staring at me with that practiced CEO smile. If you think you are worth more than what we are currently paying you, try your luck elsewhere. Honestly, maybe it is time to think seriously about early retirement. The golf courses are really nice this time of year. I felt something crack deep inside me. It was the solid foundation of 18 years of believing that eventually, my deep technical experience would matter more than age bias. It was the belief that the company I had helped build, from a scrappy 40-person startup into a 500-employee corporation, would actually remember who got them there in the first place. I understand, I said quietly. I collected my portfolio, feeling the pages tremble slightly. Listen, Paul. Chloe's voice shifted to that artificial tone of concern. You are good at what you do, but you are expensive. The board sees a senior engineer pulling your salary when we can hire 3 fresh graduates for that exact same price. They have raw energy. They do not need hand-holding. That is just business, nothing personal. As if missing Olivia's school plays and Noah's championship games to keep this company afloat was not personal. That was the exact moment I knew what I was going to do. If I was really just a replaceable cog, then maybe it was time to see how well that machine operated when the most critical piece was removed. I walked back through the noisy open-plan office to my corner workspace. My desk was wedged between 2 recent hires who frequently asked me to explain fundamental concepts. The bright morning sun streamed through the massive windows, casting long shadows across rows of expensive standing desks where 24-year-olds typed frantically, building tomorrow's technology directly on the solid foundation of systems I had architected. My computer screen displayed the usual overwhelming flood of daily notifications. Messages from junior developers begging me to review their messy code. Urgent emails from other departments pleading with me to fix massive problems they had just created. Next to my keyboard sat a framed photo of my family. Laura looked incredibly tired, but was still smiling bravely after finishing her latest round of expensive treatments. Olivia, my 21-year-old daughter, was home from university, where her tuition had just aggressively increased by 12%. Noah, my 19-year-old son, looked stressed about the crushing mountain of debt that awaited him. Healthcare premiums were eating up 30% of my take-home pay. Laura's medical bills had cost us over $45,000 out of pocket just last year alone. Olivia's education was draining our life savings. Noah was looking at state engineering schools that cost upwards of $60,000 a year, and here I was, being laughed at for asking for an 8% raise after 18 years of flawless service. Meanwhile, Chloe had just purchased her third vacation home. The company newsletter had proudly announced it, featuring a glossy photo of her accepting a prestigious Industry Innovation Award for the cloud security framework that I had single-handedly designed. I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a small, thick leather notebook. Inside were my entirely personal projects. They were documented meticulously with exact dates, detailed development notes, and rigorous implementation details. This was my private intellectual playground. The notebook contained sophisticated algorithms I had written on my own personal home computer, security protocols I had refined in my garage lab, and machine learning models I had trained using my own purchased hardware. It was code that Apex Cloud had eagerly implemented without ever going through formal legal acquisition. I had been too trusting, too eager to be seen as a team player. I stopped at my specific notes from April 2021. It was a complex series of machine learning algorithms for advanced predictive threat detection that I had developed completely on my own time during the pandemic lockdown. At the top of the page, written clearly in my own handwriting, it read, Personal Project, Predictive Security Framework, developed entirely on Home System. April 15, 2021. Below it, I had printed detailed commit logs from my private personal repository, all perfectly timestamped. What Chloe never knew, and what the Apex Cloud legal department had been far too careless to investigate, was that I had never legally signed over the rights to these specific personal innovations. The standard employment contract covered work done during company time using company resources. But my most valuable creations lived under the strict protection of California Labor Code, Section 2870. This specific law explicitly states that an employment agreement cannot quite require an employee to assign rights to an invention developed entirely on their own time without using the employer's equipment, supplies, facilities, or trade secret information. I had paid for my own servers, I had used my own electricity. I had written every line of that code off the clock. I pulled up my personal repository on my phone, scrolling slowly through the massive amount of work I had created over the years. Hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped, all strictly personal. The threat detection system that saved Apex Cloud millions was originally developed as a weekend hobby project. Every major breakthrough that the company proudly claimed as their own intellectual property had started as my personal curiosity. My computer suddenly pinged with another cheerful email from HR about the upcoming quarterly company newsletter. The headline made my stomach turn into tight knots. Apex Cloud's revolutionary security platform wins top industry recognition. There was Chloe's smiling photo again. I thought about my father. He had worked 35 loyal years at the exact same plant before they abruptly shipped his job overseas. He had believed that beautiful lie right up until the dark day they handed him a pink slip. My mother had experienced the exact same betrayal. Companies simply do not care about loyalty anymore. She had told me quietly afterward. I really should have listened to them both. Instead, I had spent 18 years pouring my soul into building someone else's empire. Chloe's mocking laughter had finally shattered that pathetic illusion like fragile glass. I picked up my phone and deliberately scrolled to a contact I had saved over a year ago but had never dared to use. Martin Delgado. He was the VP of Engineering at Nexus Wave Solutions, which just happened to be Apex Cloud's absolute biggest competitor in the enterprise space. We had connected after a regional tech conference. His last message, sent just 3 months ago, was still sitting unread in my inbox. My fingers hovered over the call button. 18 years of deep corporate conditioning screamed at me to just stop, to be reasonable. What if this was just a bad day? What if Chloe changed her mind? Then I vividly remembered her arrogant words. Maybe it is time to think seriously about early retirement. I thought about Laura fighting her illness. I thought about Olivia working exhausting 25-hour weeks at a noisy campus coffee shop. I thought about Noah. My family deserved better than a father who meekly accepted being undervalued and mocked. They deserved a man who fiercely fought for what he was actually worth. Chloe had made it perfectly clear that my loyalty meant absolutely nothing to her bottom line. Maybe it was finally time to show her exactly what my disloyalty looked like. I pressed call. Martin Delgado speaking. The voice on the other end of the line was warm, rich, and deeply professional. It had absolutely none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I had grown so used to enduring at Apex Cloud. It was real, grounded confidence. "Martin, this is Paul Jensen from Apex Cloud," I said, my voice steady despite the massive adrenaline dump rushing through my system. "I think it is finally time we had that serious conversation you mentioned." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by a tone of genuine excitement. "Paul, I was honestly beginning to think you would never call me. I have been closely following your work from the outside for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where your deep experience is actually valued?" I looked around the noisy open-plan office at the massive sea of young faces bent over their glowing screens. I looked up at the corner office where Chloe was probably already busy planning exactly how to replace her expensive legacy employee. "I am completely ready," I said firmly. "How about dinner tonight?" Martin offered without hesitation. "I know an excellent place in the city where we can talk privately. Say 7 p.m.? I quickly checked my calendar. Laura had her evening support group meeting tonight. Olivia and Noah were both busy with their evening classes. It was the absolute perfect timing to start secretly planning my new future. "I will be there," I said. As I hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of purpose. It was the incredible feeling that I was finally taking complete control of my own destiny. Chloe thought I was a highly replaceable dinosaur. We were all about to find out exactly how painfully wrong she was. 4 hours later, I sat across from Martin Delgado at an exclusive steakhouse downtown, a place that usually required reservations weeks in advance. He had made one single phone call and gotten us a quiet corner table. That alone told me everything I needed to know about Nexus Wave's massive influence and deep pockets. Martin was in his late 50s, distinguished with gray at his temples, but incredibly sharp-eyed. He wore a casual but expensive blazer. He looked like a man who had built complex systems with his own bare hands for decades before he ever learned how to manage massive budgets. "I have been closely following your architectural work for years, Paul," Martin said, studying me carefully over his glass of bourbon. "Or rather, I should say I have been closely following the sudden, massive leaps in Apex Cloud security capabilities that completely mysteriously coincided with your exact project timelines." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That predictive threat detection system you guys rolled out for the Summit First Bank contract? My entire engineering team tried desperately to reverse engineer your brilliant approach for 6 straight months. We simply could not crack it." I felt a massive knot in my stomach, beautifully mixed with a surge of intense professional pride. Someone had actually noticed. "How exactly did you know that system was my specific design?" I asked. Martin smiled warmly. "Because Chloe Harrington absolutely does not have the technical background to understand even the basic fundamentals of machine learning algorithms. I have seen her speak. She is fantastic at throwing around trendy buzzwords, but she is terrible at actual technical substance. Someone with incredibly deep expertise had to painstakingly build those complex systems." He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Plus, I have deep contacts throughout this entire industry. Your reputation among actual, working senior engineers is solid gold. Half the serious security professionals in this city know your work intimately." I took a slow sip of my water. The luxurious restaurant hummed quietly, with hushed conversations about massive IPOs. And here I was, a 54-year-old engineer sitting in a world that wrongly thought true innovation automatically stopped the moment you turn 35. "What exactly are you offering me, Martin?" I asked directly. "Senior Engineering Director position. Total oversight of our entire enterprise cloud security division," Martin replied instantly. "Base salary of $450,000. A massive full equity package that will vest fully over 4 years. And a dedicated team of 12 senior engineers. The average age on the team I am giving you is 48. We firmly believe that decades of experience creates infinitely better code than blind, youthful enthusiasm." My breath caught painfully in my throat. A base of $450,000 was nearly 3 times my current salary. It was more than enough to easily pay for Laura's expensive medical treatments. It was enough to send both Olivia and Noah to the best engineering schools in the country without drowning our entire family in crushing debt. But far more importantly, Martin continued, his tone turning fiercely serious, we offer true recognition. Your name will be legally on the patents. We are absolutely not interested in having young managers take the credit for senior engineering work. He paused significantly. And if you happen to bring your own personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed entirely on your own personal time, using your own personal resources, we have a highly rigorous, proper intellectual property acquisition process. We pay fair market compensation for proven technology. Something powerful flickered in Martin's sharp eyes. He had clearly done his extensive homework. He knew all about the massive legal gray areas that arrogant bigger companies often completely ignored. Nexus Wave was explicitly offering to properly, legally value the incredible intellectual property that Apex Cloud had simply stolen and taken for granted for years. I slowly reached into my leather bag and pulled out my thick, worn notebook. I placed it deliberately on the white tablecloth between us. I have complete Git commits and exhaustive development documentation proving these core systems were entirely personal projects, I stated clearly. Apex Cloud aggressively implemented them, but they never ever formally acquired the legal rights. They are wholly mine under California Labor Code, Section 2870. I developed everything in this book on my own time, on my own equipment, completely outside of my employment scope. Martin's eyes went incredibly wide as he slowly opened the notebook and flipped through the dense pages of complex algorithms. Each specific entry was meticulously dated, signed, and deeply documented. It was years of grueling weekend work that had unknowingly become the absolute foundation of Apex Cloud's massive market dominance. This is incredibly comprehensive, Martin whispered in genuine awe. Paul, just how much of Apex Cloud's current security infrastructure is actually based entirely on your unprotected personal work? About 65%, I said quietly. The core predictive threat detection algorithms, the advanced cloud optimization frameworks, the automated rapid response systems, all of it was developed from scratch in my home lab long before the company ever implemented them. Martin slowly closed the thick notebook. That is an absolutely catastrophic, borderline negligent oversight on their legal team's part. How is that even possible? Chloe does not value senior, experienced functions, I said, including her own legal department. She is far too intensely focused on aggressively hiring cheap, fresh talent to ever worry about properly protecting her existing critical assets. We spent the next 3 hours passionately discussing intense technical details, highly efficient team structures, and aggressive project timelines. Martin completely understood the massive complexity of enterprise-scale systems. He asked incredibly intelligent, probing questions. For the absolute first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt like I was actually talking to someone who deeply respected both my massive experience and my future potential. By the time the waiter arrived with dessert, we had carefully outlined a completely legally sound transition plan. It would smoothly bring my personal innovations entirely over to Nexus Wave, while staying perfectly within the strict boundaries of California Labor Code, Section 2870. Everything would be rigorously documented. Everything would be done exactly the way Chloe should have done it years ago. Exactly 2 weeks later, I walked calmly into the glass-walled corner office and placed my formal resignation letter squarely on Chloe's pristine desk. The deep irony of the moment was not lost on me. It was perfectly printed on official company letterhead, submitted strictly through all the proper HR channels, and followed every single rigid protocol she constantly claimed to highly value. I was going to be perfectly professional to the bitter end, even as I quietly prepared to legally dismantle the very foundation of everything she falsely thought she owned. She barely even looked up from her expensive silver laptop. Her divided attention was split between rapid-fire emails and a muted video conference. It was the exact type of frantic, performative multitasking that routinely passed for effective leadership in her modern corporate generation. 2 weeks' notice, Paul. She scanned the brief letter incredibly quickly, a slight frown of annoyance briefly crossing her heavily manicured face. Where exactly are you going? Taking that early retirement I suggested, I had briefly considered simply lying to her. But the raw truth had so much more devastating impact, and I was completely done protecting her fragile ego. Nexus Wave Solutions, I said clearly and firmly. That instantly got her full attention. Her head snapped violently up from her bright screen, her eyes narrowing dangerously with the absolute first flash of genuine emotion I had seen from her since my humiliating performance review. Nexus Wave? They are our absolute biggest enterprise competitor. Her voice lost its smooth corporate polish, replaced by a sharp edge of real panic. Paul, that is incredibly unfortunate timing. We are in the final, highly sensitive stages of negotiations with Summit First Bank to massively expand our entire security contract. You cannot leave right now. I know exactly what stage the negotiations are in, I said simply, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am the one who single-handedly built the core predictive threat detection model that originally won us that massive contract in the first place. Chloe's confident expression instantly shifted from arrogant surprise to genuine terror. For the absolute first time in my 18 years at the company, I actually saw her frantically calculating what my sudden departure might actually cost her precious bottom line. "We need to discuss aggressive retention options immediately," she stammered, frantically waving her hands as if she could physically wave away my resignation letter. "Perhaps that 8% raise you previously mentioned. Actually, forget 8%. Let's make it 15%, plus an immediate promotion to the VP level. I can have HR draft the paperwork in 10 minutes. The desperate offer was absolutely everything I had desperately wanted just 2 weeks ago. If she had shown even a fraction of this flexibility and basic respect back then, absolutely none of this would have happened. But some critical doors, once violently slammed shut in your face, simply cannot be reopened with desperate money alone. The formal offer from Nexus Wave is $450,000, plus a massive executive equity package," I said calmly, watching the sheer color rapidly drain entirely from her face. "But far more importantly, Chloe, they actually value deep engineering experience over ridiculous age bias." She let out a harsh, incredibly hollow laugh, but it sounded nothing like the incredibly confident, mocking dismissal from 2 weeks ago. "They are massively overpaying you. You are going to be incredibly disappointed when they finally realize a 54-year-old legacy engineer simply cannot adapt to their aggressive development pace. You will be out on the street in 6 months." I just smiled warmly, feeling a strange, incredibly powerful new confidence flooding my system. It was the deep confidence that only came from, finally, truly knowing my actual worth. "We will certainly see who ends up being disappointed, Chloe." My final 2 weeks at Apex Cloud were absolutely surreal. Suddenly, arrogant middle managers who had barely even acknowledged my existence for years desperately wanted to take me out to expensive lunches. They begged to desperately pick my brain about incredibly complex projects they had ignored. The entire company desperately scrambled to frantically document intricate processes they had never once bothered to actually learn. They were finally realizing, far too late, that massive institutional knowledge walks straight out the front door right along with the experienced people who originally created it. I meticulously completed every single requested transition document with absolute professional thoroughness. I spent hours patiently training my assigned replacement. He was a nervous 25-year-old junior developer who seemed simultaneously incredibly eager and absolutely terrified by the sheer, staggering magnitude of the fragile infrastructure he was suddenly responsible for maintaining. But behind the scenes, I was also incredibly busy. I meticulously backed up all of my personal project documentation, perfectly preserving every single timestamp, commit log, and development note that legally proved my ownership under California Labor Code Section 2870. I also made highly encrypted, careful copies of every single internal email where I had originally shared my personal innovations with the company. I was meticulously creating a completely bulletproof evidence trail of Apex Cloud's catastrophic failure to ever properly acquire the highly proprietary technology they had so freely and arrogantly used to build their empire. I finally walked out of Apex Cloud's massive, gleaming glass headquarters for the absolute last time at precisely 5:30 p.m. on a cold Friday evening. I did not look back. By early Monday morning, I was sitting comfortably in my massive new corner office at Nexus Wave Solutions. I was confidently explaining to my elite team of 12 highly senior engineers exactly how we were going to completely revolutionize enterprise cloud security. These were real, seasoned engineers with real, hard-won experience. The oldest team member was 58, the youngest was 42. They were brilliant professionals who deeply understood that true wisdom and intense energy were absolutely not mutually exclusive concepts. The transition was seamless. We hit the ground running with an intensity I hadn't felt in decades. Because we weren't just building software anymore. We were building a completely new paradigm, driven by a deep, collective desire to prove the entire youth-obsessed tech industry completely wrong. Exactly 6 weeks later, the highly anticipated first implementation of my proprietary security framework officially went fully live at Nexus Wave. The exact same complex algorithms that Chloe had arrogantly dismissed as outdated, legacy dinosaur thinking were now actively detecting sophisticated external threats an incredible 72 hours before they ever materialized. Overall system processing speeds instantly increased by a massive 35%. Frustrating false positive alerts dramatically dropped by over 60%. Our aggressive sales team now had the hard, indisputable data, proving we could easily outperform Apex Cloud's absolute best internal metrics by undeniable margins. The sophisticated machine learning models I had originally trained in my cold, dusty garage were now predicting complex attack patterns with an astonishing 96% accuracy rate. The highly advanced threat detection system that had quietly saved Apex Cloud millions of dollars over the years was now actively saving Nexus Wave's massive enterprise clients even more money. And this time, my actual name was properly, legally credited on every single official patent filing. For the absolute first time in my 18-year career, my own brilliant innovations finally belonged to me, both legally and professionally. The massive fallout happened faster than I ever could have imagined. The exact morning Summit First Bank publicly announced they were immediately terminating their lucrative, multi-million-dollar contract with Apex Cloud and switching all of their massive operations over to Nexus Wave. My desk phone completely exploded. The very first call was from a highly respected industry trade publication. They desperately wanted an exclusive, in-depth interview with the brilliant, mysterious senior architect behind Nexus Wave's massive security breakthrough. The second call was from an aggressive venture capital firm practically begging to exclusively license our proprietary threat detection technology for their own massive portfolio companies. The third frantic call was from Chloe Harrington. I calmly let it ring and go straight to voicemail. She called my office line 6 more times over the next 2 chaotic days before finally leaving a desperate, highly emotional message that I permanently saved for posterity. Paul, this is Chloe. We need to discuss lucrative consulting opportunities immediately. Apex Cloud is fully prepared to offer an unprecedented compensation package for your exclusive technical expertise. Please, Paul, call me back as soon as you get this. We made a massive mistake. The desperate admission felt hollow. It was entirely too little and far too late. It was clearly motivated by sheer, unadulterated financial panic rather than any genuine recognition of my actual value. I absolutely did not return the call. 4 days later, I was walking to my car in the secure Nexus Wave parking garage when I saw her. Chloe was waiting nervously right beside my vehicle. She looked drastically different. She looked tired, deeply stressed, and completely lacking any of the polished, arrogant corporate confidence she had weaponized against me that morning when she had laughed at my simple request. The power dynamic between us had completely, violently shifted, and we both knew it instantly. "This is inappropriate, Chloe," I said sharply, maintaining my physical distance while calmly fishing for my car keys. "You have put over 200 jobs at severe risk, Paul." She practically screamed, her voice completely urgent and desperate. Apex Cloud is facing a massive existential crisis entirely because of the proprietary intellectual property you stole from us. I absolutely did not take a single line of code that legally belonged to Apex Cloud, I replied calmly, my voice perfectly steady. I merely took my own personal intellectual property that your company had been illegally using without proper acquisition. Your highly paid legal team never did their basic due diligence. And you, Chloe, never valued your experienced personnel enough to actually care about the legal details of California Labor Code Section 2870. My work was done on my time, with my equipment. It was never yours to begin with. Chloe took a desperate step closer. The sheer, raw panic was evident in her bloodshot eyes. She had probably been working frantic 20-hour days desperately trying to contain the massive corporate damage. Name your absolute price, Paul. Whatever Nexus Wave is currently paying you, we will immediately double it. We will triple it. We will make you the CTO. We will give you massive equity. Just please, whatever you want, come back and fix this. I stood there in the quiet concrete garage and thought deeply about those 18 long years sitting in that noisy, cramped cubicle while she confidently collected massive executive bonuses for my grueling technical work. I vividly remembered the morning she had arrogantly dismissed me like a piece of broken, obsolete hardware. I thought about Laura's terrifying medical bills, and Olivia and Noah's massive educational dreams that her cruel 8% refusal had so casually jeopardized. You once confidently told me that absolutely everyone is replaceable, Chloe, I said quietly, looking her dead in her desperate eyes. Even senior engineers with decades of experience. I am simply following your own brilliant business philosophy to its logical conclusion. I got into my car and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the dark garage. The very next financial quarter, Apex Cloud's highly inflated stock price violently plummeted by a catastrophic 48%. They immediately laid off 210 employees in two brutal, massive waves, cowardly targeting the senior staff with the highest salaries first. The tech media brutally described it as a catastrophic, unprecedented loss of critical institutional knowledge and a completely mysterious, massive deterioration of their formerly award-winning security systems. Massive industry analysts wrote entire, extensive case studies detailing the severe lethal dangers of severely undervaluing experienced talent in highly competitive, aggressive markets. Chloe was violently forced to resign under aggressive pressure from the angry board of directors after their stock hit a dismal 4-year low. Her desperate replacement was a seasoned, 57-year-old former enterprise executive who immediately began frantically trying to poach experienced senior engineers from competitors. But it was far, far too late. The catastrophic damage to Apex Cloud's reputation within the tight-knit engineering community was absolutely irreversible. Then, inevitably, came the aggressive corporate lawsuit. In a sheer act of utter desperation, Apex Cloud formally sued me for massive theft of intellectual property, aggressive corporate espionage, and severe breach of fiduciary duty. They demanded tens of millions in damages, but their expensive case completely collapsed spectacularly in federal court. My meticulous, highly detailed documentation proved absolutely and conclusively that I had developed all the core algorithms entirely as personal projects, fully protected by California Labor Code, Section 2870. The federal judge was so thoroughly disgusted by their lack of evidence that he not only immediately dismissed all their baseless claims with extreme prejudice, but he also awarded me full massive legal fees. In his final ruling, he explicitly noted that Apex Cloud had catastrophically failed to ever secure proper legal ownership of the massive innovations they had so eagerly implemented and profited from. The victory was total and absolute, but massive. Total victory felt far more emotionally complex than I had ever originally expected. Exactly 3 months after the brutal lawsuit finally ended, Brenda Collins, Apex Cloud's former head of enterprise customer service, quietly visited my new office at Nexus Wave. She had been with the company for 14 loyal years before the massive, brutal layoffs hit her department. She was someone I had often shared quiet morning coffee with, frequently complaining about arrogant management decisions right alongside her. 210 good people lost their jobs, Paul, Brenda said quietly, sitting across from my massive wooden desk. She looked tired, worn down by the stress of sudden unemployment in an industry that hated older workers. These were people with large families, massive mortgages, and kids struggling in college. Was your intense, personal revenge truly worth completely destroying their entire livelihoods? The pointed question hit me far harder than any aggressive corporate lawsuit ever could have. I had been so intensely focused on utterly destroying Chloe's massive arrogance that I had completely underestimated the severe collateral damage to the good people left behind in the blast zone. "You are absolutely right to be angry, Brenda," I said quietly, leaning forward. "And that is exactly why Nexus Wave has quietly aggressively hired 85 former Apex Cloud employees over the last 4 chaotic months, including absolutely everyone from your entire former customer service team who actively wanted to join us." Brendan's hard expression softened slightly, surprise flashing in her tired eyes. "And what about all the others? The ones who simply cannot relocate? The ones who are highly specialized in legacy systems, the ones who are dangerously close to retirement and cannot get an interview anywhere else?" That incredibly difficult conversation directly led to the massive creation of the Experience Matters initiative. It was Nexus Wave's highly formal, massively funded internal initiative specifically targeting displaced, highly senior tech professionals industry-wide. We aggressively partnered with 4 major retraining organizations to offer highly subsidized skills updates for engineers over the age of 45. We created massive, flexible consulting opportunities for near-retirement professionals who wanted part-time arrangements. We proudly became the absolute first major tech company in the city to explicitly and publicly reject aggressive age bias in all our hiring practices. The incredibly successful program quickly became a massive, highly discussed model for the entire industry. Other major enterprise companies finally began seriously questioning their own highly toxic, youth-obsessed hiring practices. Within a single year, applications to our open senior positions massively increased by an incredible 450%. Experienced, brilliant professionals specifically sought out our company because they knew we actually valued their deep expertise far over their perceived energy levels. 8 incredibly successful months after completely leaving Apex Cloud behind, I proudly stood on a massive, brightly lit stage and received a highly prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award for my massive contributions to enterprise cloud security architecture. Standing right there at that massive podium, looking out at a massive, packed audience full of gray-haired senior engineers and young, eager developers working beautifully together, I deeply thought about Chloe's arrogant, mocking comment regarding early retirement. She had been completely catastrophically wrong about absolutely everything. We were absolutely not expensive, useless legacy employees stubbornly clinging to outdated dinosaur approaches. We were highly skilled, battle-tested professionals who deeply understood the critical difference between moving incredibly fast and actually building robust systems that work reliably long-term. When you successfully combine decades of hard-won, grueling technical experience with the intense, burning motivation to prove arrogant doubters completely wrong, you create something that is absolutely, terrifyingly unstoppable. A full year later, I still occasionally think about that humiliating morning in Chloe's corner office. But I do not think about it with any burning anger anymore. I think about it with something closely approaching deep, genuine gratitude. Her cruel, mocking laughter ultimately taught me the absolute most valuable, profound lesson of my entire 18-year career. Your intense, unquestioning loyalty to a massive corporation means absolutely nothing if you do not actively, fiercely value yourself first. The gray hair that she arrogantly saw as a massive corporate liability turned out to be my absolute greatest competitive advantage. Last month, Apex Cloud briefly made the financial headlines one final time. They officially declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy and desperately sold off all their remaining gutted assets to a ruthless private equity firm for absolutely pennies on the dollar. The massive company that I had literally helped build from a tiny 40-person startup into a 2,500-employee corporation was completely gone. It had been entirely dismantled and destroyed by arrogant leadership that foolishly confused manic energy with actual competence and chaotic disruption with true, meaningful innovation. If you are currently reading this story, and you happen to be over 45, dealing with arrogant, younger managers who foolishly think your massive experience is merely expensive rather than incredibly valuable, I want you to remember something critical. Your deep knowledge isn't just worth passively defending, it is absolutely worth fiercely fighting for. Meticulously document your hard work. Deeply understand your specific legal rights, like California Labor Code, Section 2870, and never ever let any arrogant executive convince you that your absolute best years are somehow behind you. Because sometimes the absolute most powerful thing we can ever do is simply, firmly refuse to become invisible to the system. Age is absolutely not a weakness in the tech industry. It is deep, massive wisdom just waiting to be fully unleashed. And when vast, unappreciated experience finally gets angry enough to aggressively demand the respect it deserves, entire massive industries are forced to change. The advanced predictive algorithms are still running flawlessly on my servers. My actual name is proudly legally stamped on the massive patents. And somewhere out there, an arrogant former CEO is finally learning the hard way not to ever laugh at a senior engineer who simply asks for what he has rightfully earned.